Now, do you remember last November when EU leaders put off until another summit a decision on how much Europe should spend? Well, it's here. Mark Urban is there. How's it going, Mark?
Well, Eddie, the leaders arrived here in such an uncompromising mood that the people trying to choreograph the talks to get them into agreement had to start this summit nearly 6 hours late. As it stands, Herman Van Rompuy, who is the point man in trying to gain agreement, still hasn't tabled his compromise proposal. So concerned is he about the distance that still separates the different parties and the fact that someone might veto his proposal as soon as he tables it. So they could be talking well into the night. And the fascinating thing is the way that the countries seem to be lining up, and that it's along the lines of an ancient fault line which can still be seen at play. Centuries ago, Europe was sharply divided by religion. And the Protestant northerners considered themselves more righteous, clearer thinking than those who retained their faith in the old doctrines of the Catholic Church. With today's budget deadlock, there are curious echoes of that. From Germany to the Netherlands, Sweden or the UK, there's a desire for cuts, pulling the plug on the union's traditional job preservation schemes. I don't want to labour the religious analogy, but there is one interesting point of comparison. Today, as centuries ago, the northern nations demand reformation. It's as if they can't stand bureaucracy, waste, and by implication, handouts. As he arrived for today's meeting, I asked Sweden's Prime Minister whether there were political risks in a division of North and South.
For a long time now, a lot of problems in Southern Europe. They need to increase their competitiveness. They have a lot of tough reforms. A lot of their people are tired of all of these austerity measures. At the same time, in Northern Europe, we have a more competitive economy. And then, of course, we need to take care that European Union in itself provides answer that increases the competitiveness of Europe as a whole.
And it's clear now that the Northern Bloc is happy to promote itself as such. For soon after he appeared, David Cameron came to call upon the Swedish Prime Minister, followed by the leaders of the Netherlands and Denmark. They held a meeting to coordinate their position, vowing to hold firm for further cuts in the EU's €1 trillion plan for the next 7 years. But where was Europe's linchpin in this? Chancellor Merkel stayed away from that meeting, despite sharing many of the northern states' views, perhaps aware of the dangers of polarization.
We are coming together today and tomorrow in a new attempt to complete a medium-term financial plan for the European Council, which will be put to Parliament. Whether we'll be successful, we cannot say.
Those in the other corner, including Italy, Spain and France, emphasise solidarity and the need to spend in order to grow out of recession. They decry what seems to be a debate in which some characterise the Mediterranean countries as idle.
And it's true that, there's some countries that have borrowed beyond their capability maybe to pay back, and it's also true that some countries probably have lent, or some institutional countries have lent without the sufficient credit analysis that they should have done at the time, and maybe they lend to lose, and that cycle is reinforced both sides of the situation. So the important thing, I don't think we should put this into a moral content. It's not that you have some good people and some bad people.
Or lazy and hardworking.
Exactly, or lazy versus hardworking people.
What was clear as the leaders assembled for talks tonight is that gaps of perception as well as of budgetary figures remain large. Compromise is essential since the leaders failed to agree at the last summit. And Ireland, now holding the EU presidency, is struggling to achieve it, all too aware that Voices Off may regard this torturous negotiating process as a sign of deeper dysfunction.
It's not an ideal process, that's for sure. You know, I think if you were starting from scratch, you'd probably devise a better way to come up with a budget. But I suppose it's, you know, it's a legacy and it's a process that has evolved over many decades at this stage. So it's not perfect, but I think, you know, from our point of view, the EU budget adds value. And I think, you know, when we look at the EU budget, like any budget, like a national budget, you know, we have to spend better. We have to be smarter in terms of how we invest our euros, and at EU level I think that's particularly important when you're talking about transnational projects, when you're talking about the Connecting Europe facility, for example, when you're talking about research and development, when you're talking about those types of investments. We have to be smart, we have to be future oriented, and we have to be careful with taxpayers' money.
Britain is sitting comfortably among the budget hawks. It's not isolated, as so often here. But the question for the Swedes or others is whether they'll also line up with Britain on the big picture of getting a new deal in Europe.
Let's listen to United Kingdom and David Cameron, and let us say that it's a good thing that he's taken an initiative that can enable United Kingdom to stay inside the European Union, because that's an absolute value for Sweden. It's an important ally for Sweden, it's an important ally for Europe. So I will be pragmatic and listen to David Cameron, but it's a tough thing to say that you should negotiate a lot of the substantial parts of the European Union that is already in place.
Europe is too secular, too modern these days to default to its old religious divisions, but they do appear still to inform its culture and some of its stereotypes. Under the pressure of economic stagnation, the differences between Europe's north and south may now intensify.
And Mark, with those differences, will Mr. Hollande be the key?
Sorry, Eddie, I didn't catch your question.
Will Mr. Hollande be the key to solving these differences between north and south?
Well, he, of course, is a key protagonist in this. He's vowed to defend the principle of solidarity, as he calls it, which is redistribution, effectively, from the richer to the poorer regions of Europe. And people say that he and Mr. Cameron arrived in much more difficult or intransigent moods, threatening to veto any proposals than was expected. So a meeting that we had been expecting, in which Angela Merkel was going to sit with the two men and try and mediate a solution, did not happen. Mr. Hollande did not come to that meeting, David Cameron did. Now, there were all sorts of possible explanations for this, from, you know, it was a diary problem as he coordinated with some of the others, President Hollande, through to the differences were still too great, and the Germans themselves felt that maybe it would do harm to air them in that sort of forum. But one person on the inside of these talks told me tonight that Mr. Hollande seems to have come to the conclusion that the defence of the principles that he feels Europe is built upon, i.e. against David Cameron's agenda set out in his recent speech on renegotiation, starts here.
Should we expect decisions at the summit, or just another summit?
Well, you know, the issues have become largely symbolic in this, I think. That the negotiating box, which the two sides are arguing about on the spending, it should not be that hard to bridge. That's why many people before this said, oh no, there should be agreement. But then there's the whole question of to what degree the European Parliament will sign off on what the leaders agree. So will it come to an agreement? Very hard to say. If it does, will it then go through the Parliament? This could be a prolonged crisis.
Mark, thank you.